So once you collect that data, you put it in the cloud, you build software that uses the data. How then do you change the way someone operates a building or the experience of a tenant within the space, right? So that involves user experience. It involves data engineering and data science and software engineering and understanding the role of stakeholders. So, understanding all of that technology, maintaining that understanding as technology progresses is a real challenge.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Zak Kostura, Associate Principal and Digital Services Leader for Americas East at Arup. Zak, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Jose. Good to be here.
Let's dive in. So before you were working on some incredible projects, both buildings, infrastructure, airports, you were just a kid. Why buildings in the first place? Why the built environment? Take us back.
I think it all started when I was in college. My ethics professor introduced me to a PBS documentary called The 59-Story Crisis, which, I'm not going to get into now, but was about the City Core building and some, design decisions that were regrettable afterwards and the ethical crisis that happened. And I think the whole thing was just really compelling to me as a place where somebody could have such a big impact on such a big piece of, a city like a big building. And so it drove me to sort of explore buildings engineering, particularly structural engineering. And, that led me to Arup, where, I had the opportunity, the good fortune really to work on some really novel and iconic projects, including the Fulton Center project in New York, which was, I really got to cut my teeth on some high performance structures on that. And in doing that, we really needed to use computational design, advanced technologies computation to be able to do that. And when that project ended, I guess I had sort of cut my teeth on that kind of technology. So I was asked to lead the design of the roof for the new international airport for Mexico City with Norman Foster and Fernando Romero. And that was it was an amazing project. I mean, the roof was a forum found space frame structure, had 750,000 elements to it across a building that if you could stand at one end and see the other end, it would be 8 inches lower because of the curvature of the earth. And there were only sort of 21 mega columns in this whole thing. And the project was so ambitious on such a fast schedule that the only way to deliver it was to design software to design the building. And so it sort of compelled me and our team to sort of think differently about what it meant to do structural design. And, that led to about 2018, 2019. And when that project wrapped up, under unfortunate circumstances, but after we got all the fun we could out of the design phase, I transitioned over and just started leading a team of, digital practitioners to try to do that broadly across all of Arup's projects. That sort of leads me to where I am today.
And what's that day-to-day look like today? I mean, between teams and the tools you're implementing, my assumption is that you're working on across various sectors, various scales. What's your day-to-day look like?
Well, the day-to-day involves managing a team of practitioners that are responsible for understanding the technology, right? Technologists. So everyone from those that understand how to collect data from the built environment, familiar with IT and communications and smart buildings, all the way to the individuals that understand how to influence operational workflows with that insight. So once you collect that data, you put it in the cloud, you build software that uses the data. How then do you change the way someone operates a building or the experience of a tenant within the space, right? So that involves user experience. It involves data engineering and data science and software engineering and understanding the role of stakeholders. So understanding all of that technology, maintaining that understanding as technology progresses is a real challenge. But then being that consultant that can go into the room and listen to a client's problem and to think about how that entire mix of technology can be brought in an elegant way to solve that problem and to make that case. That's really what it looks like. It looks like technologist plus consultants and bringing in alongside those, the subject matter experts across all aspects of design.
Talk to me about those frameworks. So when you're presenting a project and presented a unique set of challenges, problems, how do you start to think about the right technology? I imagine the answer is not, one size fits all, but how do you start to understand like the right technology for the right project?
Well, I mean, the opportunities are so vast. And the first place to think is like, where am I within the project lifecycle? right? So when we think about buildings design, right, that's just part of it. There could be earlier in the phase where we're in site selection or feasibility. There could be later where we're in construction, commissioning, or operations. But if we just pick design for a moment, right, we can narrow the technology space down to what is useful in helping the design team carry out the best possible design, right? That's a key area where we oftentimes work with our teams. And designs are increasingly becoming more complex as we think about not only the conventional considerations that have always been there, like cost, construction schedule, risk management, but also new considerations such as sustainability and decarbonization, in terms of climate resilience, in terms of future proofing. These new considerations get brought in, and the design team doesn't have any more of a budget, honestly, to take in more considerations, more KPIs. So leveraging technology as a way of doing that has been really crucial for us. So we'll often, use our knowledge and expertise about the certain types of design that will happen. So for example, we might be in a place where wind comfort within an urban environment might be interesting. So what applications, what AI models can we potentially bring to be able to rapidly evaluate how different design decisions could affect wind comfort? And then how do you help the client understand the outcomes of that, right? So, I think that, the best way to answer the question, Jose, with all of that is probably to say, listen to the design team, understand the priorities, and then pick the technologies, whether they're ones that we've developed or ones that exist already from, partners in design tech and construction tech to bring to bear to just have the best possible outcome on the design experience, right? So that's one example. And then you could take a similar model to, operations if you want to improve the operations of an existing building, right?
Walk me through that. So AI is on everyone's mind right now, and I'm curious from a day to day and kind of at a project level. You double click into the subject, you've got just kind of general AI, you've got machine
Yeah.
learning to kind of train problems. Like how are you thinking about it? How's your team kind of using it in very specific applications?
I think everybody's experimenting with AI in whatever way they can, whatever way they feel comfortable. We've tried to get a little organized in our thinking around it. We've sort of broken the use cases in AI down to using AI products that are, brought onto the market by third parties, whether that's something like Microsoft Copilot or OpenAI, or it's something like an AEC specific design package that might help you. So they're sort of using AI, and then there's developing your own neural network models or doing your own machine learning, right? And I think it's really important to delineate both of those and to understand that there are really good use cases to just go out there and use an AI product. And the challenge is, you're just like any other product, you use it, but you have to trust what you get out, right? So there's that. And then on the other side, the development of it is something where there's not an open, available product. You want to go ahead and do your own development. And so you go ahead and you set up the frameworks to be able to do that. Now, the first one, using a product, is pretty straightforward to do on a project that's happening, right? So we're designing a building. We want to go ahead and analyze, solar net gain on the outside of the building, for example. We might go ahead and utilize, existing plugin for Grasshopper or a web product or something. And it's pretty straightforward to bring the experts in to just validate the outputs of something like that. So that's pretty straightforward. We've learned that trying to develop your own AI workflows or something from scratch it's not compatible with the pace of a project. And so what we do is we sort of identify those gaps and we see where those trends exist. And then off the project, we'll invest in the development of an AI solution. And when we think it's suitably mature, we'll bring it onto the project. And so a recent example, we've got a design platform called Arup Inform, which is just a generative design platform that allows you to explore the solution space of a parametric model. But we've integrated a couple of plugins, one called Preact, which just does AI-driven wind analysis for us. And we found a good reason to use AI as opposed to another way is that it's faster oftentimes, right? So anybody who's done, design through architecture, engineering, and have used, products to help you figure out things like lighting or carbon footprint or whatever knows that every time you have an option, there's a whole process to get the outputs and the outcomes of that. So AI can shortcut all of that, and you can get back to just studying options, right? So setting up those workflows off the project has been really helpful so we can bring them on. And so biodiversity, wind, comfort, solar, these are some areas where we're really starting to see the benefits of AI that we've developed. And we can couple that with places where we've got third-party products that we can bring in to have a very sort of holistic view of a project. And sometimes AI isn't the right answer, but I think that in terms of what we look for, when speed is a key and when detail is a key in the outputs, AI can be a really good, important part of that workflow.
Help me connect the dots a little bit. So you're working across multiple sectors, multiple, I assume, project sizes. And one of the paradoxes, specifically within the AEC sector, is that on the one hand, you have a very kind of project-based workflow, right? And a firm will often land one project, maybe they land the next project. There may or may not be much correlation between one and the other. And I contrast that versus perhaps a more kind of traditional product development approach where you're building tech that often does kind of require a certain kind of zeroing in on a particular problem, clearing everything out, assuming kind of standardized inputs and outputs. How do you, is there a way you think about this to kind of reconcile the two? You're kind of being pushed on the one hand as an AEC firm, and on the other hand, you're building productized tools.
Yeah, Jose, it's a really great observation, and I really resonate with it. I think, when I started my career, I really got excited about the most iconic, bespoke, one-off buildings that were out there, right? The Zaha Hadid buildings, the Rem Koolhaas, those are the ones I wanted to work on as a structural engineer. And now as a digital practitioner, it's very interesting because absolutely you can have more of an impact on the workflow of design when the design is done consistently. So, for example, where we're able to pilot not most, but a lot of our emerging technology is not in commercial property or residential, but instead it's in science, industry, and technology, right? Think data centers, think, chip fabs, think logistics warehouses. These are, facilities where an owner could really endeavor to have hundreds or thousands of pretty much the same thing, right? And when you have a client whose business model thrives on consistency in their buildings portfolio, you really have much more of an opportunity to take a product approach to how you design, to the point where, with some of our data center clients, we're able to help them so they have the tooling that allows them to bring a project to a reasonably good level of detail before they release the RFP, right? And increasingly, the site adaptation architect and engineer are taking a fairly well thought out design and are really just ticking the boxes in terms of making sure that it's fit for purpose on that site, that everything's approved with the authorities having jurisdiction and all of that. That's great for their model, right? Because it means that they can have more consistency, more control over the design process. And for us, it means that we can have this really interesting controlled environment to build a more productized approach. And some elements of that do translate over to the more traditional one-off developer-led building designs. But to your point, it has to be done thoughtfully because it's not one for one. It's a very different environment when every building is its own prototype, right?
I might open up a can of worms here, but I'm always curious, having come from an architectural firm, I do wonder if at certain point A&E firms serve as great incubators or incredible technology ideas that at a certain point they will kind of have to spur off into kind of their own business models. Because what I often find is that there's kind of a traditional business model within A&E firms, and sometimes the technology is just calling for its own route. Has that been the case, or am I thinking about this wrong? I know there's examples of firms like Shop, right, that is kind of notorious for spinning off a few companies here and off. Or do you see another model where there is a way to kind of reconcile both the traditional, engineering firm, billing hours together with building technology?
I think we're trying, and I think we're finding some success in it. Within Arup, what we've been able to do is find instances where an idea seems to have scalability. And for a few years now, the organization has set up internal funds that are sort of like almost like venture capital funds inside of Arup, right? To be able to incubate ideas that seem to have scalability. Now, we've learned first off that product development is very different than consulting in the built environment. It takes a completely different skill set, different set of experts. So there is potency to that idea that it should be spun off. But I'll also say that, I'm the product manager of two products, software products within Arup. And I think what's really powerful of trying to incubate those within an engineering firm is that the development of the product is happening so much closer to the front lines where the product is being used. I speak to software startups where they really struggle to get valuable feedback from those early adopters to drive their product development in the right direction. And it's more frictionless for us, right? Because we're sitting right next to those people. And in fact, they're incentivized to use it because the development and everything is done in-house. It benefits us as an organization. So, and that we're less reserved about the free flowing of candid information, right? So I do think that we're able to get farther with smaller development budgets because of that proximity to the front line. But we've also seen that the resources required to truly scale a product are immense. And there is a point in time where even if you use that model, you ask whether or not it makes sense to get outside capital. And there are some places where we are actively exploring that. And we've got an internal ventures team that has gotten much better at alternative commercial models, because you really have to be exploring alternative commercial models if you're going to try to get into that kind of space outside of consulting.
And I imagine if done well, this presents a unique opportunity for firms to actually stand out, right? Thinking as to, if kind of an ocean of different firms, those building unique capabilities, services, and tools just kind of stand out. I mean, is that how you see
Yeah.
it? Or
I think so. I mean, I think just about every moderate to large sized organization has started to develop, I don't know if you use like Python scripts, C# scripts, Excel spreadsheets to basically try to standardize and automate part of their design methodologies, right? And now with AI, the fact that you don't have to necessarily capture a calc or a design step in linear code, but it can be vastly more complex and captured within a convolutional neural network model or something like that, right? That means that you can't automate your entire organization, but you can take parts of it that you see delivering time and again, whether that's a mechanical, duct sizing approach, or it's an approach to finding the best way to a net zero design. And you can start to package that up. And I think what this allows organizations to do is to say they're able to identify these parts that you can turn into these things that become the first point of contact. You can imagine, or I imagine, that there's a lot of clients out there that their first point of contact with Arup may be that they come to one of our digital products and they get some level of insight into what their design might be. An architect might, design a certain massing and get some insight that they would go to an engineer for by plugging that into an Arup piece of software. And at some point, they would have to reach out. We'd have to start that traditional collaboration. But I think every organization could think about what could those new touch points look like for, clients, customers that I haven't been able to access, that now they can access through this sort of new digital interface on a way to a person. So it doesn't cut out the consultant, but it just brings them in through a different channel, right?
it's a fascinating thought because, I guess traditionally you have firms with folks on the business development, perhaps principals, partners on the front lines doing business development. And that's kind of if you will, the kind of storefront of the firm. What I gathered while you're speaking is, perhaps that storefront actually becomes some of the software tools that you just provide as value add, right? Where that actually becomes the storefront for the firm.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what specific project or perhaps use case, in the range of projects you worked on stands out as like a great example as to, whether it was building tooling for energy analysis, you mentioned duct sizing. Give me an example. So like here's a case where with the right tooling, we were actually able to, smash it out of the park on just delivering this project.
Yeah. So we recently worked with a startup within the tech environment. They're an AI chip startup. So this organization is looking to develop specialty chips that can be, sourced to customers. And they're trying to circumvent the big barrier that most chip companies are facing in the time it takes to build a factory, right? Like Taiwan Semi or Intel, to build one of their typical gigafactories costs billions of dollars and can last the better part of a decade before it comes online. And this organization, what they want to do is they want to do small batch chip development out of small modular facilities that could be operational within a year of identifying a site, and they can basically be posted up nearby to wherever the customer or client might be to avoid the supply chain issues we've seen play out over the past several years. And we've been working with them not only to help them to design, again, this is an example of consistency being an asset to the client. They want all of their facilities to be modular, the same kind. They're going towards volumetric modular as opposed to kit of parts DFMA, right? And so they really want this to be set up in such a way that a consistent design has good versatility, can go to a lot of places, satisfy a lot of business cases. And they brought in Arup SMEP design teams to help them design that initial basis of design. And to do that, the design teams picked a hypothetical site because SMEP teams think very well in terms of what are the site constraints? How do I design for this site? And what our digital team did to help the client, because they wanted a facility that had flexibility, adaptability, is we started to develop these tools that enabled them to rapidly evaluate the suitability of that prototype design on any site in the world based on climate, right? Based on certain code requirements. And the overall set of design parameters can grow and evolve over time. The software solution that we deployed was essentially one that had scalability in that way. But in that way, what we could do is we could then map with this initial design, we set it up and so you could visualize how the design performs against a certain set of design criteria. So it has a certain preset mechanical design, right, that has a certain limit to the wet bulb temperature that it can, that can be in the climate environment that it's suitable for, right? So you could put wet bulb temperature as a site parameter that this design is, can either meet or cannot meet. And so you can suddenly drop a pin on a map, and with the design you currently have, you can see what characteristics of that site your design fits with, and which ones it's okay but it isn't optimal, and ones where you need a different design. And so we started to build these design tools that allowed them to see how this prototype version would fit. And then we took that prototype design and we started to create this digital catalog using a non-relational database. We took every piece of that design and set it up and drew the relationships between wet bulb temperature or the certain type of equipment or a certain piece of code, so that over time, as it gets adapted to a new site where a piece of the site criteria just doesn't work with that design, you could say, all right, well, these pieces don't work, so I'll add these different pieces to the catalog. And over time, instead of having a bunch of disaggregated different designs, they have one design that has a set of options, and it gets increasingly flexible and adaptable over the course of the world. And I think that really stands out to me as like one where we were able to come in and use digital technology to meet a client's really ambitious desires in a novel way.
You talked about relational databases and whatnot. Like, what are some of the inputs when you're starting a project? What are some of the inputs that you need, right? What are some of those things that you're often gathering, right, to provide value on the other end?
I think what we found is that in order to develop good digital solutions, you really have to be problem driven. You don't start with the data. I think a lot of times project teams make the mistake of saying, we're going to take the data and do great things. It's like, that's a recipe for spending a lot of money and not getting much out of it. What you should do is say, this is my problem, right? So if the problem is that I want one design that works anywhere in the world, you say, well, okay, I know that as an engineer, I know you're going to need different mechanical systems, different structural systems, right? So how do I give you one design that's actually many designs? And so that to us was sort of like, well, we're all familiar with the BIM model, right? We're 20 years in on our BIM journey together. And so it's a matter of thinking about that, but thinking about how we can swap pieces in and out of it and tie it to design criteria. And so with the right digital practitioners around the table, you've got this problem, you've got some foundational precedents that everyone can get their head wrapped around. And then you have a discussion. And what came out of that was, well, let's have a database that drives this. Revit is itself just a database, but we need something that's a little bit more robust than your typical sort of table-oriented one. So we're like, a graph database. And through a couple of experiments with a couple of different clients, we've sort of refined this process. And it kind of gets back to what you were saying before, Jose, of like every project is sort of like its own little snowflake, but we're taking the methodology and we're making it a little bit more mature every time we deploy it. And when you're not really changing the methodology as you go from client to client, you're just reinforcing and growing it. That's an indicator that, hey, I've got something that's really gonna have broad scalability and something that I can really confidently take to the next client because it's proven itself out over use case after use case, right?
It's not lost to me. I think at once you are designing the firm itself, the company that is designing the tools that is ultimately then designing the buildings and the skill sets today, or rather even the opportunities today that, for example, a structural engineer has is a lot more diverse today than it was even, I assume, when perhaps you and I left school originally. What would you tell, say, your younger self coming out of college as to all the various ways that they should think about, right, the engineering field? I guess the traditional structural engineering role is one thing, but you've talked about relational databases, private SIM specialists.
Well, it's interesting. I think first off, I saw a really great quote the other day. Don't think about your career like a ladder. Think about it like a jungle gym. I think I got out of my graduate work as a structural engineer thinking about Fazler Khan, right, and Les Robertson, and saying I want to be the best possible structural engineer I can be, and I'm just going to go up, 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 up. And what my career has shown me is that in doing structural engineering, I found specific parts of that work that really challenged and interests me, and I pursued that. And I think that what I would say to me coming out, I think I look back and I don't have regrets about my career path, but I think it took me a while to really embrace the fact that it wasn't checking the rebar shop drawings that was really driving my passions. It was coming up with the informational challenge and finding the way to use technology to solve problems that couldn't be solved 5-10 years ago. Right. And I think if I were to speak to other engineers coming out of school, I'd say change is constant. The tools and the methodologies and the workflows and the role of you as a practitioner are going to change decade by decade. So be open to changing yourself and how you define your value, I think.
You alluded to this, but the question that I like to end with is, I imagine 5 years from now, we're going to look back and we're likely going to laugh at ourselves. We sound silly talking about, the tools today. Who knows what we're going to be using in 5 years?
Yeah.
But I do think it's worth asking perhaps the question in reverse, which is what, based off your experience with the way we engage with buildings, what is likely not going to change in 5, 10, 20 years with the way that we engage with buildings?
Yeah. Well, I think that what isn't going to change is the importance of the designer in the process. And for that, I look to the iPhone, for example, right? The iPhone, I don't think they're ever going to be done designing the iPhone, right? I mean, even if the technology stayed still, they'd continue to re-envision how it would function, how it would look, how it would feel every year, right? I think there's a fundamental aspect of human nature to having this sort of like duplicitous relationship with change, right? We fear it, but we also need it. And I think because of that, designers will always be there. And I think technology will change the way that designers carry out their work. I think that modular and kit of parts and cataloging will change how unique buildings are. But I do think that we will always need designers because it's in human nature to need designers, I think.
Zach, it's been a really fun conversation. If folks want to follow along with your work, what's the best place to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not much of a social media guy, but I'm pretty active on there. And I encourage anyone to reach out who wants to have a conversation. I'm always open for it.
Thanks so much. And I can't wait for part 2. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.